It was well past midnight, the kind of hour when the house feels larger than it really is. I'd been tossing and turning for so long that the sheets were warm in all the wrong places. Eventually I surrendered, slipped on my robe, and padded down the hallway for a glass of water. That's when I noticed it. A pale, flickering glow leaking from the sitting room, the television. A reminder that, for the first time in years, I wasn't the only heartbeat under this roof. 3 days earlier, my friend Dana had called me in tears. Her voice had that brittle edge people get when they've been trying not to cry all day and finally fail. "Lena," she'd said, "I need to ask you something and I hate that I'm asking. Before I unfold the rest of this night, take a second to hit like and subscribe. It really does help more than you know. And if you're drawn into stories like this, I want you here for every one of them. Also tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you in a small town where the evenings fall slow and gentle? Or in a city where the lights never quite go dark?" Her nephew, Ethan, had just found out his wife had been seeing someone else. 10 years together, gone in a single, humiliating revelation. The apartment they'd shared felt poisoned now. Every corner, every picture frame, every grocery list on the fridge was another way to bleed. "He can't stay there," Dana pleaded. "He's barely eating, he's not sleeping. He needs somewhere quiet, somewhere that isn't full of her." I didn't know Ethan well. I'd met him at a handful of holidays, a couple of backyard barbecues. I remembered polite conversation, a quick smile, the kind of man who helped clear plates without being asked. But I knew heartbreak, and I knew what it meant to wake up to a life you didn't recognize. My husband, Martin, had died 6 years ago. I was 58 then. The night before, we'd been sitting at the table, arguing, gently, about whether the new porch should have steps or a ramp, for when we're old, he joked, like we had all the time in the world. By morning, he was gone. A sudden heart attack, the doctors said. No warning, no second chance. Just a quiet, brutal ending. After that, my home turned into a kind of shrine. Not intentionally. It just happened. His coat stayed on its hook. His mug stayed in the cabinet like it was waiting. His slippers sat under the bed for months because I couldn't bring myself to touch them. Over time, I learned to live with the stillness. I became competent at being alone. I filled my days. I smiled when I was supposed to. I played piano when the silence felt too sharp. But some nights, especially nights like this, the loneliness didn't sit beside me politely. It leaned its full weight on my chest. So when the television glow pulled me toward the sitting room, I followed it like a moth. Ethan was on the couch, shoulders slightly hunched, watching an old romance movie. The volume was low, almost apologetic, and the light from the screen painted shifting shadows across his face. My first thought was simply I should make sure he's okay. My second thought, quieter and harder to admit, was, I don't want to go back to that empty bedroom yet. Ethan looked up as I stepped into the doorway. "Did I wake you?" he asked. His voice was soft, but there was something under it. Exhaustion, yes, but also that raw, uncertain quality people get when their life has split in two and they're still standing in the crack. "No." I lied gently, because it was easier than explaining insomnia and grief, and the way the dark makes everything louder. I just couldn't sleep. Came to get some water. I stood there a moment too long, suddenly aware of my robe, my bare feet, the fact that I hadn't been this close to another person at night in a very long time. Ethan shifted and gestured to the cushion beside him. "If you want," he said, "you can sit. Company's better than staring at the ceiling." I hesitated, then crossed the room and sat down, careful to leave a respectful space between us. The movie continued, a couple arguing, then laughing, then leaning closer as if love could solve everything neatly in under 2 hours. I tried to focus on the screen. I couldn't. Every few minutes I was aware of Ethan's presence in a way that didn't feel appropriate to notice. The warmth of another body in the room, the faint scent of his soap, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. At one point I shifted, and my arm brushed against his. It was nothing, barely a touch, but my nerves reacted like it was lightning. I pulled back immediately. "Sorry," I muttered, staring at my hands as if they'd betrayed me. "It's okay," Ethan said, quick and gentle. "Really. Don't worry." After that, neither of us spoke. The movie ended. Credits rolled. A song played over the final scene, something slow and aching. I stood up too fast. "Well," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Good night." "Good night," he answered. I went back to my room and lay down, but sleep didn't come. It wasn't desire exactly. Not in any clean, simple way. It was confusion. It was loneliness. It was the memory of being touched, innocently, accidentally, and realizing my body still remembered what closeness felt like. Morning arrived the way it always does, indifferent. I made coffee, stared out the window for a while, and then, Because I didn't know what else to do with myself, I sat at the piano. The piano had become my way of breathing when words failed. Martin used to sit in the doorway with his arms folded, smiling like I was playing just for him. Sometimes he'd tease me about repeating the same songs, and I'd tell him it wasn't repetition, it was comfort. That morning, my fingers found the keys and started moving before my mind caught up. The melody filled the living room, soft at first, then steadier. I let myself sink into it, letting the notes say the things I couldn't. I didn't notice Ethan come in from outside. I didn't notice the door open, or the quiet pause of someone listening. Not until the final chord faded and the room fell silent, I looked up. Ethan was standing near the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching me like he didn't want to startle a wild animal. For a second, I couldn't speak. Then he smiled, small, genuine. "That was beautiful," he said. Heat rose to my face in a way that startled me. "Thank you," I managed, looking down at the keys as if they'd done all the work. Ethan stepped a little closer, still keeping distance, like he understood boundaries even when emotions didn't. "Today's my birthday," he said, almost sheepishly. "I'm 40. I blinked. "Your birthday." He nodded. And honestly, hearing that just now, that's the best thing I've heard in months. Something in my chest softened. The kind part of me, the part that still wanted to take care of people, woke up immediately. "Well," I said, trying for lightness, "then we can't let that pass without something. We'll do a proper celebration tonight, cake. A glass of wine, the whole thing." His expression brightened like a curtain pulled back to let in a little sun. "Only if you play again," he said. I laughed, nervous and surprised by how easy it felt to laugh. "Deal," I said, "but you're helping me pick the cake." I refused to guess wrong. Before the day slipped away, I should tell you this. What happened next isn't a fairy tale. It isn't neat. It isn't something I'm proud of. It's a story about blurred lines and lonely hearts, and what can happen when two hurting people sit too close to the edge of their own lives. So if you've ever felt the ache of emptiness in a full room, if you've ever surprised yourself with a choice you didn't think you were capable of, you'll understand why this night mattered. And if you want more stories like this, quiet, complicated, human, stay close. There's more coming. That evening, I set the table like it mattered. Not fancy, just intentional. 2 plates, 2 forks. A small cake from the bakery down the street, the kind with real frosting, not the too sweet grocery store kind. I opened a bottle of red wine I'd been saving for a someday that never seemed to arrive. Ethan came in wearing a clean shirt, hair still damp from a shower, looking slightly more like himself than he had the day before. We ate, we sipped, and we talked. Not just small talk either. He told me about the moment he found out, how it wasn't even dramatic, just sickeningly ordinary. A message left open. A name he didn't recognize. The sudden feeling of the floor moving under him. I told him about Martin, about the porch argument, about the way the future can vanish between one sunset and the next sunrise. At some point, Ethan looked at me over the rim of his glass. "How old are you?" he asked, and there was a playful spark in his eyes that felt both flattering and dangerous. I raised an eyebrow. "Careful." He grinned. 47. I snorted, despite myself. "Not quite." "Okay," he said, leaning back like he was considering a puzzle. 50. I shook my head, laughing again, feeling that strange warmth in my cheeks. "Older?" I admitted. He stared at me for a beat, then said quietly, "I wouldn't have guessed." It was a simple thing, a compliment people toss around. But when you've spent years feeling invisible, simple things can land like thunder. Later, he lifted his glass and tapped it gently against mine. He said, "To surviving," I echoed. And then, like we'd agreed to it without saying it out loud, he nodded toward the piano. "Aren't you forgetting something?" he asked. I pretended to groan. "Fine. But if I mess up, you're not allowed to laugh." "I would never," he said, solemn enough to make me smile. I sat down at the bench and let my hands settle into a familiar piece. The melody was steady, calming. I focused on the sound, on the structure of it, on the way music gives you rules to follow when life refuses to. When I finished, I felt lighter, not healed, not fixed, just less alone. Ethan came closer, stopping a respectful distance behind me. "You have no idea what that does to a room," he said. I turned my head slightly. "It's just piano?" "It's not just piano," he replied. "It's you." I should have stood up right then. I should have said goodnight. I should have remembered every reason this was a bad idea, but loneliness doesn't always listen to reason. Ethan lowered himself onto the bench beside me, careful at first, like he was waiting for me to flinch. Then he reached out, not boldly, not greedily, just gently, placing his hands over mine on the keys. The contact made my breath catch. "You're remarkable," he said, voice low. "And I think you've forgotten that." The room felt too warm. Or maybe I did. I didn't pull away. Time blurred after that, not because anything happened in a single dramatic moment, but because boundaries can dissolve one quiet inch at a time. A brush of fingers. A shared laugh that lasts a little too long. A silence that stops feeling awkward and starts feeling heavy. At some point we moved from the piano to the couch. At some point the wine stopped being celebratory and started being an excuse. And at some point, in the dim light of the living room, two lonely people crossed a line they couldn't uncross. I won't dress it up as romance. It wasn't. It was need. It was grief. It was the human craving to be held when the world feels like it's falling apart. When morning came, reality returned like a cold splash. Sunlight slid through the curtains. The house looked painfully normal. The air smelled like yesterday's candles and coffee that hadn't been made yet. I got up slowly, heart heavy, and followed the familiar scent into the kitchen. Ethan was there, standing at the counter with a mug in his hands. He'd thrown on a t-shirt, hair still messy, eyes tired. He looked up when he heard me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There are silences that feel comfortable. This wasn't one of them. I sat at the table because my legs didn't trust themselves. Then, my voice sounded small. About last night. He swallowed, then nodded once. I know. I stared at the grain of the wooden table like it might offer instructions. It can't happen again, I said, forcing the words out before fear could stop me. It was a mistake. We were both, I exhaled. We were lonely. We were hurting. But this isn't a solution. It's just a way to make the pain louder later. Ethan's jaw tightened as if he was holding something back, shame, regret, maybe even disappointment. You're right, he said. I've been thinking the same thing since I woke up. I don't want this to turn into something that hurts you. Or me. Or anybody. The honesty in his voice made my throat burn. I nodded. I think you should stay somewhere else. He didn't argue. He didn't try to charm his way around it. He just looked down into his mug and said, I'll go tomorrow. I'll pack today. Relief and sadness hit me at the same time, tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. The rest of the day was quiet in the worst way. We moved around each other like strangers sharing a hallway. Polite. Careful. Avoiding eye contact as if looking too long might reopen the whole night. That evening, Ethan carried his bag to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob and turned back. Lena, he said softly. Thank you for giving me somewhere to land when everything fell apart. I nodded, because if I tried to speak, I would have cried. I hope you find your footing again. He hesitated, then added, you deserve peace too. Not just silence, actual peace. Then he opened the door and stepped out into the morning air. The latch clicked. The house swallowed the sound. And I was alone again. But something had changed. The silence didn't feel like a blanket anymore. It felt like a choice, one I could shape. I walked to the piano and sat down, not because I was calm, but because I needed to be honest with myself in the only language that had never failed me. My fingers hovered over the keys. I thought about the version of me that had been living on autopilot, surviving from morning to night, calling it fine, because it was easier than admitting it was empty. I thought about Ethan, about his brokenness and mine, and the way pain can make you reach for the nearest warmth without asking what it costs. Then I started to play. Not the old songs Martin loved, not the ones that kept me tethered to the past. Something new. Simple at first, then stronger, as if my hands were learning a different kind of life. Later that day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I picked up my phone and called a local music group I'd been too shy to join. I asked about meeting times. I wrote them down. I told myself I would actually go. Because healing isn't a grand declaration. Sometimes it's just one small decision after another. And that's where this chapter ends, not with a perfect answer, not with a tidy romance, but with a woman choosing to step back from the edge and walk herself toward something steadier. If you want more stories like this, stories about love that isn't simple, and choices that aren't easy, stay with me. The next one is already waiting.